Some stories find you when you're ready for them. This one came to me years ago, from a collection of frontier accounts I discovered in my grandfather's trunk ledgers. Scraps of memory from a time when the West was still being settled. It spoke of dignity in hard times, of value overlooked, and of the quiet courage it takes to stand still when the world tells you to move along. I share it now because I believe there's healing in remembering how our forebears endured. Perhaps you'll find a piece of yourself in these pages. As I did. The third merchant wouldn't even touch the leather. Morning Dove stood in the doorway of Pritchard's trading post, 3 handcrafted saddles loaded on the mule behind her, and watched the man's eyes slide past her like she was fog. October dust coated the hem of her deerskin dress. Her stomach had forgotten bread 2 days ago. Don't deal in that kind of goods. Pritchard arranged tin cups on a shelf, his back already turning. She didn't argue. Argument cost energy she couldn't spare. Outside, Clayton Springs moved around her women in calico crossing the street to avoid her path. Men spitting tobacco juice near her mule's hooves. A boy pointed. His mother yanked his arm and hurried on. Morning Dove led her mule to the boardwalk's edge, near the feed store where the shade was decent. She sat. Arranged the saddles where passers-by could see the stitching if they cared to look. No one looked. A stray dog limped over, ribs showing through patchy fur. She reached into her pouch, broke off her last piece of jerky, and held it out. The dog took it gently. "You and me both," she said. If this story speaks to something in your heart, I'd be glad to know where you're listening from today. They say a story shared is a burden halved, and sometimes a joy doubled. The feed store door banged open. Morning Dove didn't look up. She'd learned that lesson years ago. Looking up invited trouble. Invited conversation. Invited the kind of attention that ended with sheriff's deputies and long walks out of town. Boots on the boardwalk. Heavy stride? A man's shadow fell across the nearest saddle. She kept her eyes on the dog, now curled at her feet. The boots stopped. Then, and this was the strange part, they circled. Slow, deliberate. The way a man circles a horse he's thinking of buying. She risked a glance. 45, maybe older. Sun-creased face, gray threading through brown hair that needed cutting. His clothes were worn but clean, not a town man, not a drifter. A rancher, maybe. The kind who worked his own land. He crouched beside the middle saddle. Morning Dove's shoulders tightened. Here it comes. The low offer. The insult dressed up as charity. But he didn't speak. His fingers calloused. Dirt under the nails traced the cantle's curve. Followed the stitching down to where the rawhide lacing secured the tree. Double-stitched. His voice was low, almost talking to himself. Waxed thread. She said nothing. He flipped the fender, examined the underside, ran his thumb along a seam she'd spent 3 hours perfecting. Who taught you? The question landed wrong. Too direct. No one asked who taught her anything, they asked how much. Or they asked her to leave. My husband. He nodded. Didn't offer condolences. Didn't ask what happened. Just, he knew what he was doing. Past tense. He'd caught it. Let it sit there without making her explain. Something shifted in her chest. Caution, mostly. But underneath something she hadn't felt in months. He stood, brushed dust from his knees. What are you asking? $12. Each. No hesitation. He reached into his coat, pulled out a leather coin purse, and counted. Silver dollars clicked against each other. 1, 2, 3, 36 total. He set them on the saddle seat and stepped back. Morning Dove stared at the coins. Full price. No haggling. No lecture about Indian goods and fair market value. I need 6 more, he said. Custom work, cavalry specifications. She looked up, really looked for the first time. You got a place to work? The question hung there, ordinary as dirt, dangerous as a lit match near dry grass. Morning Dove didn't answer right away. The coin sat on the saddle seat, catching October light, $36. More money than she'd seen in 8 months. Enough for flour, salt pork, coffee enough to survive another season, but survival wasn't what he was offering. What kind of arrangement? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The man, she still didn't know his name, pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. A supply list, she realized. Cavalry specifications written in neat, careful script. I got a cabin sitting empty on my property. Used to be for the foreman. Before, he stopped. Started again. It's got a stove, a bed, good light for close work. You'd have access to my leather stock, my tools. I'd cover materials. We split the profit on each saddle. How much? 50-50. She shook her head. 60-40. My favor? I'm doing the work. Something flickered across his face. Not anger. Something closer to respect. 55. Then final offer. 5? Final. I keep my own hours. You don't come in without knocking. Fair enough. And I leave when I want. No questions. He nodded, extended his hand. Caleb Thornton. She looked at his hand for a long moment. Rough palm, honest calluses. The hand of a man who worked. Morning Dove. They shook once. Brief. Business concluded. The road out of Clayton Springs wound through brown hills dotted with scrub oak and wild sage. Morning Dove's mule, Paulo Spiel, followed Caleb's horse at an easy pace, the 3 saddles now secured in his wagon alongside grain sacks and fence wire. 7 miles, he'd said. 7 miles felt longer when every hoofbeat carried her further from the last town that might take her in if this went wrong. She memorized landmarks as they passed. The creek bed dry now, but the cottonwoods marked where water ran in spring. The split boulder that looked like a broken tooth. The ridge where the road curved west. That's the Sutter place. Caleb pointed to a distant farmhouse, smoke rising from the chimney. Widow and her boy. They keep to themselves mostly. Morning Dove filed the information away. Nearest neighbor? Might matter later. They passed a burned-out homestead, blackened timbers, a chimney standing alone like a headstone. Weeds had grown up through what used to be the floor. Mackey place, Caleb said, not slowing. Drought took his cattle. Debt took the rest. He left 3 winters back. Where'd he go? Didn't ask. Wasn't my business. The road climbed. The sun moved. Neither of them filled the silence with unnecessary words. And Morning Dove found herself grateful for that. Too many white men talk to hear themselves think. This one seemed comfortable with quiet. Thornton Ranch appeared around a bend in the road, a barn, a house, a scattering of outbuildings arranged in the practical geometry of a working spread. The barn was well maintained. Its red paint faded but intact. The house was smaller than she'd expected. Tidy, functional, empty. Not abandoned empty, lived in empty. The difference showed in small things: a single rocking chair on the porch. Just one. a garden beside the house that had gone to wild sage and thistle, the fence around it still standing, but the beds untended. Curtains in the windows, but no movement behind them. A dog came limping around the corner of the barn, brown and white, medium-sized, missing its front left leg. It barked once, then recognized Caleb and settled into a slow, uneven trot toward them. That's Bishop. Caleb swung down from his horse. Found him in a coyote trap 3 winters back. Vet said put him down. Bishop had other ideas. The dog sniffed Mourning Dove's mule, deemed it acceptable, and sat down in the dust to scratch behind its ear. He bite, only if you're a coyote. Mourning Dove climbed down from her mule. Her legs ached from the ride. She stretched, slow, taking in the layout of the property while pretending to work out the stiffness. The tree line sat maybe 200 yards behind the cabin. Thick enough for cover, close enough to reach at a run. Old habit. She couldn't help it. Caleb led her past the main house to a smaller structure set back near the barn. Single room, from the look of it. Plank walls, tin roof, a stovepipe poking up at an angle. He pushed open the door. Hinges creaked. Dust motes swirled in the afternoon light slanting through a single window. A rope bed against one wall. The mattress rolled up and tied. A potbelly stove in the corner, cold and dark. A table and chair. A coal oil lamp with a cracked chimney. 4 years of emptiness hung in the air, thick as cobwebs. "Needs airing," Caleb said. "Bedding's in the trunk there. I'll bring water from the well." Mourning Dove stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under her weight. She crossed to the window, real glass, not oiled paper, and tested the latch. It stuck, then gave. "Door's got a lock." Caleb pulled a key from his pocket. Iron, old, heavy. He held it out. She took it. The metal was warm from his body heat. "It's yours long as you're working." He turned and walked back toward the main house. Bishop limping along behind him. No ceremony. No speech about rules or expectations. Just the key in her hand and the empty cabin waiting. Mourning Dove stood in the doorway. The tree line. 200 yards. Maybe less. The creek bed they'd passed, she could find it in the dark if she had to. The Sutter place. 5 miles back. Give or take. She counted escape routes the way other women counted blessings. It was how she'd stayed alive this long. The sun dropped lower. Shadows stretched across the yard. From the main house, she heard Caleb pumping water, the rhythm steady and unhurried. Bishop had followed him halfway, then stopped. The dog sat in the dirt between the cabin and the house, looking back at her with his head tilted, as if trying to decide where he belonged now. Mourning Dove looked at the key in her hand. $36 in her pocket. A roof over her head. Work that paid fair wages. It was more than she'd had yesterday. More than she'd had in years. So why did her hands keep shaking? Mourning Dove woke before the sun touched the horizon. Old habit. The kind that kept you alive when sleeping too long meant someone found you first. She lay still on the rope bed, listening. Wind against the cabin walls. A horse shifting in the barn. Bishop's tags jingling faintly as he scratched somewhere outside. No footsteps. No voices. No danger she could name. She rose, dressed in the gray half-light, and crossed to the window. The main house sat dark and quiet. Caleb Thornton was either still asleep or already gone, she couldn't tell which. The tack room. That's where the leather was. She'd seen it yesterday when he'd shown her around. Stacks of hides in varying grades. Spools of thread. brass rivets in wooden boxes. Tools hung on pegs along one wall, awls, needles, mallets, edge bevelers. Some she recognized. Some she'd need to examine closer. The barn door wasn't locked. She slipped inside, breathing in the familiar smell of horse and hay and old wood. 2 stalls occupied Caleb's bay gelding and an older mare with a white blaze. They watched her pass with calm, disinterested eyes. The tack room was smaller than she'd hoped, but better organized than she'd expected. Morning Dove lit the lamp hanging near the door and began her inspection. The leather first. She pulled the top hide from the stack, turned it over, ran her fingers along the grain. Decent weight, acceptable flexibility. But the tanning was uneven. She could feel it in the thickness, the way certain sections would stretch while others held firm. The second hide was worse. Dry spots near the edges. Poor storage. The third was passable. "This'll do," she murmured. Barely. She was examining the thread spools when she heard boots on the barn floor. Steady stride. Caleb's walk, she'd memorized it yesterday without meaning to. He appeared in the tack room doorway holding 2 tin cups, steam rising from both. "Coffee?" he said. Not a question. He set one cup on the workbench and kept the other. Morning Dove picked it up. Hot, strong, better than anything she'd had in months. "Who sold you this leather?" "Pritchard." "He cheated you." "The tanning's uneven. Half of this will crack before winter." Caleb sipped his coffee, didn't argue, didn't defend. Just, "What should I look for? I'll write you a list." He nodded and left her to work. The first saddle tree needed reshaping. Morning Dove spent the morning with rasps and sandpaper, adjusting the angle of the cantle, widening the gullet to cavalry specifications. Sweat gathered at her temples. Her shoulders ached. The familiar burn of focused labor spread through her hands. She didn't stop when Caleb brought lunch bread, cheese, dried apples. He set the plate on the workbench and retreated without comment. She ate with one hand while the other held a half-finished piece in place. The food was simple. The silence was better. By afternoon, she'd finished the tree and started cutting leather. The pattern existed only in her mind measurements her husband had taught her, proportions she'd refined through years of practice. Her knife moved in long, confident strokes. The hide parted clean. Caleb came back twice. Once to refill the water bucket. Once to ask if she needed anything. "Neat's foot oil?" she said without looking up. "And more waxed thread? The heavy gauge?" "I'll ride to town tomorrow." She nodded. Her hands never stopped moving. She worked until her fingers cramped and her vision blurred 8 hours, maybe 9. Her body remembered its limits even when her mind wanted to push further. In shades of rust and amber. Bishop had in shades of rust and amber. Bishop had followed her. He sat on the cabin step, watching her eat with patient, hopeful eyes. She gave him the last bit of cheese. The second day passed like the first. Work, coffee, brief exchanges about materials and measurements. Morning Dove found a rhythm in the routine wake. Work, eat, sleep. No decisions to make, no towns to navigate, just leather and thread and the quiet satisfaction of skill applied. On the third morning, something shifted. She took her coffee on Caleb's porch instead of returning to the cabin. Didn't sit in the rocking chair that felt like too much, but leaned against the railing, watching the horses graze in the near pasture. Caleb came out a few minutes later. He didn't comment on her presence, just settled into his chair and drank his coffee in silence. Bishop lay between them, his missing leg tucked beneath him. content. Caleb rode to Clayton Springs after breakfast. Morning Dove watched him go from the tack room window. The wagon rattled down the road, growing smaller until the bend swallowed it. She was alone. The realization landed strange, not frightening. Exactly. But unfamiliar. She hadn't been truly alone in months. There was always a town nearby. Always the possibility of discovery. Always the need to stay alert. Here, the only sounds were wind and horses and the creak of the barn settling in the morning warmth. She worked. Caleb returned in late afternoon, the wagon heavy with supplies. Morning Dove heard the wheels on the road and came out of the tack room, wiping her hands on a rag. He pulled up near the barn and climbed down, moving with the stiffness of a man who'd spent too long on a hard seat. "Got your oil?" He hauled a crate from the wagon bed. "Thread, too. And extra rivets. The hardware man had brass ones from back east." She inspected the supplies. Good quality. Fair prices. From the look of the quantities. "The thread you got last time," she said. "Get more of that." Caleb set down another crate. Already did. Something flickered at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. Close enough. He started unloading the rest: flour, coffee, salt pork, a bolt of canvas she hadn't asked for but could use. She helped without being asked. And they worked in the efficient silence of people who understood that some tasks didn't require conversation. When the wagon was empty, Caleb leaned against its side and pulled out his tobacco pouch. He rolled a cigarette with practiced hands, lit it, and smoked for a moment before speaking. "Martha Hutchins asked about you." Morning Dove's hand stilled on the crate she was carrying. "General store," Caleb continued. "Wanted to know if that Indian woman was still at my place." "What did you tell her?" "Didn't tell her anything. Bought my goods and left." He took another drag. Exhaled. The smoke curled upward in the still air. "She said Christian charity only goes so far." "What'd you say to that?" "Said it's a good thing it ain't charity then." Morning Dove studied his face. He wasn't looking at her, watching the horizon. The cigarette burning down between his fingers. No tension in his shoulders. No apology in his voice. Just facts. Reported and dismissed. She picked up the crate and carried it toward the tack room. "There's a man in town," Caleb said. "Virgil Dietz. Speculator from back east. Bought up the old Mackey place at auction. Been sniffing around other properties too." Morning Dove stopped walking. "He heard about the saddles? Asked questions: who's making them, what they sell for, where you came from." "What'd you tell him?" "Same thing I told Martha. Nothing." She turned to face him. "But he kept asking." Caleb crushed the cigarette under his boot. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something other than calm practicality in them. He's the type who keeps asking until he gets what he wants. The fourth saddle was different. Morning Dove stood in the tack room, studying the cavalry specifications Caleb had brought back from town. The measurements were precise: cantle height, gullet width, stirrup placement, all designed for long hours in the saddle. For men who rode hard and couldn't afford equipment failure. The tree she'd been using wouldn't work. Too narrow through the bars. The cavalry horses were bigger than ranch stock, broader through the back. And a poor-fitting saddle would mean sores, lameness, a ruined animal. She needed to reshape the tree from scratch. The problem was weight. Joseph had always handled the heavy work clamping the wood, holding it steady while she measured and marked. She'd watched him do it 1,000 times, knew the process by heart. But knowing and doing were different things when you were working alone. She tried anyway, wedged the tree against the workbench, braced it with her hip, and reached for the rasp. The wood shifted. She adjusted. It shifted again. 20 minutes of fighting with it, and she'd accomplished nothing but frustration and a bruise forming on her thigh where the tree kept slipping. She heard Caleb's boots on the barn floor before she saw him. He appeared in the doorway, took in the scene, her sweating, the tree at an awkward angle, the rasp lying useless on the bench, and said nothing. Pride told her to keep trying. Practicality won. "I need another set of hands." He crossed the room without comment. "Show me where?" She positioned him at the end of the tree, guided his grip to the right spots. "Hold it steady. Don't let it twist." He braced. She measured. The tree stayed put. "Tilt it toward me. Just a little." He adjusted. She marked the wood with a stub of carpenter's chalk, quick lines indicating where material needed to come off. "Now turn it. Other way." They worked in silence, finding a rhythm. He anticipated her movements. After the first few adjustments, knew when to hold firm, when to ease up, when to rotate without being asked. His hands were steady, patient. An hour passed. The tree took shape under her rasp, the cavalry specifications emerging from raw wood like something that had always been waiting inside. "That's enough for today." She stepped back, wiping sawdust from her forearms. "The wood needs to rest before I do the finish work." Caleb released the tree and flexed his fingers. Didn't know wood needed rest. Everything needs rest, even things that look solid. He studied her for a moment, not staring, just looking. The way he'd looked at her saddles that first day in Clayton Springs. Then he nodded and headed for the barn door. "You made that rocking chair." He stopped, turned halfway. Morning Dove gestured toward the main house, though the chair wasn't visible from here. The one on the porch, the joints there hand-cut, pegged, not nailed. "Same technique as the tool handles in here." Observant. "My husband was a woodworker. I know the signs." Caleb leaned against the doorframe. His face gave nothing away, but something shifted in his posture, a loosening. Maybe. A door cracking open. "Made two," he said. "Broke the other one up for kindling." He didn't explain why. Didn't need to. Morning Dove had seen the single chair, the empty space beside it. Some math didn't require numbers. "The tools in the corner," she said. "The woodworking ones. They're good quality. You could get decent money for them." Reckon I could. But he wouldn't. She knew that without asking. Evening settled over the ranch like a held breath. Morning Dove sat on Caleb's porch, not in the rocking chair. Not yet. But on the top step, with her back against the railing, he sat in his chair, coffee cup balanced on the armrest, watching the light fade from the western ridge. Bishop lay between them. The dog had made his choice 3 days ago, following her to the cabin each night, sleeping on the step outside her door. Caleb hadn't commented. Neither had she. "Joseph made the trees." The words came out before she'd planned them. "I did the leather." She kept her eyes on the horizon, not looking at him. "We were faster together. He'd have 3 trees finished by the time I completed one saddle. Always waiting on me." A pause. He never complained about waiting. Caleb refilled her coffee from the pot on the porch rail. The pot was nearly empty. He gave her more than himself. "How long were you married?" 12 years. He was older, had a first wife who passed before I knew him. No children from either. She wrapped both hands around the cup, feeling the warmth. "Fever took him. 3 winters back." Did he suffer? Not long enough to know he was dying. Small mercy. I suppose. The words hung in the cooling air. Caleb didn't offer comfort. Didn't try to fill the silence with empty phrases. He just sat. And she found herself grateful for that. Ellen died in childbirth. His voice was quieter now. Not softer, quieter. The baby, too. 8 years ago, come spring. Morning Dove turned her head. He was looking at the horizon, same as her. What was her name, the baby? Margaret Ellen, after both grandmothers. He took a sip of coffee. She'd have been 7 now, 8 in April. You keep count. Hard not to. An owl called from somewhere in the tree line. Another answered. The horses moved in the near pasture, their shapes dark against the darkening sky. Joseph talked in his sleep, Morning Dove said. Whole conversations with people I'd never heard of. I used to lie awake listening, trying to piece together stories from fragments. She set down her cup. I still listen for it sometimes, when the nights are too quiet. Caleb was silent for a long moment. Ellen sang while she cooked, off-key, every single song. Didn't matter if it was a hymn or a drinking song, she'd murder them all the same way. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Drove me crazy at the time. You miss it. Every single day. The owl called again. Closer now. Morning Dove pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The temperature was dropping. October nights in this territory ran cold, and she'd need to add fuel to her stove before sleeping. But she didn't move to leave. Not yet. The second chair? She said. The one you broke up? What did it look like? Caleb considered the question. Maple. Like this one. Smaller, though. Smaller. Narrower in the seat. She was... He stopped, started again. She was a small woman. I built it to fit her. You haven't made anything since. Haven't had reason to? She thought about the dusty tools in the corner of the tack room. The woodworking bench pushed against the wall, unused. The skill sitting idle because the purpose had gone. The tree I'm shaping, she said. It needs finish work tomorrow. Sanding, mostly. Takes a different hand than rough shaping. He looked at her. I could teach you, if you wanted to learn. The offer sat between them, simple on the surface, complicated underneath. She was asking him to pick up tools he'd set down. He was being asked to build something again. Caleb drained the last of his coffee and set the cup on the porch rail. What time? After breakfast. The light's best in the tack room before noon. He nodded. Stood. The rocking chair creaked as his weight left it. I'll be there. He went inside. Bishop rose, stretched his three-legged body, and padded over to press his head against her knee. She scratched behind his ears. Guess you've made your choice. Then, the dog's tail wagged once. She stood, finally, and walked toward her cabin. Bishop followed. When she reached the door, she paused with her hand on the latch. The lock was solid. The key heavy in her pocket. She went inside without turning it. Morning Dove dreamed of Joseph that night, not the fever, not the end, but before. The two of them working side by side, sawdust in the air, leather smell mixing with fresh-cut wood. He was saying something, but she couldn't hear the words, just the shape of his voice. the familiar rhythm. She woke to Bishop barking. Not his usual bark, the half-hearted announcement when Caleb came outside. This was different. Sharp. Urgent. She was at the window before she was fully awake. Lantern light moved near the barn. 2 figures. Neither one was Caleb. Mourning Dove pressed her back against the cabin wall, watching through the window's edge. The lantern bobbed near the barn entrance. One figure held it high, while the other worked at the door. She could hear their voices low, muffled, but not the words. Where was Caleb Bishop's barking had stopped. The dog stood rigid at the corner of the cabin, hackles raised, a low growl building in his throat. The main house door banged open. Caleb emerged with a rifle. He didn't run, moved with the measured stride of a man who'd done this before. The lantern light swung toward him. "Evening, Mr. Thornton?" The voice carried across the yard. Familiar? Mourning Dove placed it. After a moment, Harlan Pritchard from the trading post. The man who wouldn't touch her saddles. "Little late for a social call, Harlan." "Wasn't social." Pritchard lowered the lantern. The other figure stepped forward, younger. Thick through the shoulders. His son, maybe. "My boy here thought he saw someone sneaking around your property and figured we'd check on you." "That right?" "Neighborly concern, nothing more." Caleb didn't lower the rifle. "Appreciate it. But as you can see, everything's fine." "Is it?" Pritchard's gaze swept the property, the barn, the cabin, the thin column of smoke rising from Mourning Dove's stove. "Heard you've got company these days, the kind that might attract trouble. Only trouble I see came riding up my road uninvited." A long silence. The younger Pritchard shifted his weight, hand moving toward his belt. His father put out an arm, stopping him. "Just being neighborly," Pritchard repeated. His voice had cooled. "A man living alone out here, people worry. Tell people to mind their own." Pritchard tipped his hat, a mockery of courtesy, and turned back toward their horses. The younger one followed, shoulders stiff with anger he didn't bother hiding. Mourning Dove watched them ride off into the darkness. Caleb stood in the yard until the hoofbeats faded, then lowered the rifle and looked toward her cabin. She stepped outside. "How long?" she asked. "Few weeks, maybe less." He walked toward her, the rifle resting easy against his shoulder. "Dietz has been stirring people up, talking about property values, about what kind of element brings a community down. And Pritchard listens. Pritchard's got a son who can't find work and a store that's losing customers to the new place in Ridgefield. He'll listen to anyone who tells him it's someone else's fault." Mourning Dove wrapped her arms across her chest. The night air bit through her shawl. "I should leave. You should come to town tomorrow." She stared at him. "I need supplies. You need dye, oils, things only the apothecary carries." He met her gaze steady. "If you're going to stay, they need to see you. Not as something Pritchard talks about. As a person. And if they don't want to see me as a person, then at least they'll know you're not hiding." Clayton Springs looked different in daylight. Mourning Dove sat straight on the wagon seat as they rolled down the main street. She felt the stairs like heat on her skin from the boardwalk, from shop windows, from the group of men outside the saloon who stopped talking as the wagon passed. She didn't look away, didn't look down, kept her eyes forward and her shoulders back, the way her mother had taught her. They can take everything else. Don't give them your dignity. Caleb pulled up outside the apothecary. A small shop, neat and orderly, with blue glass jars visible through the front window. "I'll be at the feed store." He climbed down. "Take your time. Get what you need." She entered alone. The apothecary was an older man, bald, with spectacles perched on a thin nose. He looked up when the bell above the door chimed, and something flickered across his face. Surprise? Calculation? Resignation? But he didn't ask her to leave. "Help you. Indigo dye. 2 blocks. And neat's foot oil, the pure kind, not the blended." He nodded, moved behind the counter to gather the items. His movements were efficient, professional. He didn't make conversation, didn't try to shortchange her when she paid. "Anything else?" "Waxed thread. Heavy gauge. If you have it." He did. She added it to her purchases and counted out the coins exactly. "Thank you." He nodded again. Nothing warm in it, but nothing hostile either. A transaction completed. The most she could hope for. She stepped outside into the autumn sunlight and found Virgil Dietz blocking the boardwalk. He was dressed too well for Clayton Springs. His suit cut from fabric that belonged in San Francisco or Denver. A watch chain glinted at his vest. His smile showed too many teeth. "Mrs. He paused, affecting embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I don't know your proper name." "Morning Dove." "No family name?" "No." He absorbed this without blinking. "I'm Virgil Dietz. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance, Mr. Thornton." She waited. "I've heard remarkable things about your work. Quite remarkable." He stepped closer. The smell of bay rum and pomade reached her, thick and cloying. The Eastern market has a tremendous appetite for the genuine article. Native craftsmanship. There's a fortune to be made for someone with your talents. My saddles sell fine here, to ranchers, for ranch prices." His smile widened. "I'm talking about collectors, museums, wealthy men who'll pay 10 times what a cavalry contract offers. I could set up distribution, handle the shipping, the marketing, all the unpleasant business details. You'd just make the saddles. And what would you take? A reasonable percentage. 30%. 30% of my work for doing paperwork, for opening doors you can't open alone." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Let's be honest. A woman in your position without citizenship, without protection, you're vulnerable. I can provide security, legitimacy, a partner with influence." Morning Dove met his eyes, up close. She could see the calculation behind the charm, the way he measured her like merchandise. "My saddles are genuine," she said. "My prices aren't negotiable. And I already have a partner." Dietz's smile didn't falter, but the warmth behind it vanished. "Thornton, he's a rancher with 40 head of cattle and a mortgage. I'm offering you an empire." "I'm not interested in empires. Everyone's interested in security, Mrs." He caught himself. "Morning Dove, and especially people who've never had it." She stepped around him. He didn't try to stop her, but his voice followed. "Think about it. Winter's coming. Things get harder when it's cold." Morning Dove found Caleb at the feed store, loading sacks of grain into the wagon. She climbed onto the seat without speaking, her supplies clutched in her lap. He finished loading, climbed up beside her, and clicked to the horses. They were a mile out of town before he spoke. Dietz found you? He was waiting? Figured he might be. Caleb kept his eyes on the road. What did he offer? Distribution, protection, 30% of my work for the privilege of having a white man sell it? What did you tell him? No. Caleb nodded. They rode in silence for another quarter-mile. He talked to me too, at the feed store, after you went into the apothecary. Morning Dove turned to look at him. His jaw was tight, a muscle working beneath the weathered skin. Said he wanted to buy out our arrangement. Set you up in a proper operation, his words. Offered me a finder's fee. He spat over the side of the wagon. Like you were a horse I found wandering. What did you say? We told him to ask you himself. He said he did, and you declined. Then he said women change their minds, especially when winter comes. The same words, the same threat dressed up as concern. What did you tell him then? Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. Told him my table's mine, and I'll leave on it what I want. She watched the road ahead, the brown hills rolling toward the horizon. The wagon creaked and swayed. The horses plodded on. He'll try again, Caleb said. I know. What do you want to do? Morning Dove thought about the apothecary's cool professionalism, about Pritchard's midnight visit, about Dietz's smile and the threat wrapped inside his offer. Keep working, she said. It's the only answer men like him don't know how to hear. That night, she sat on the porch with Caleb, watching the stars emerge. I've seen men like Dietz before, she said. In every town. They dress different, talk different, but they all want the same thing, which is everything that isn't theirs. She pulled her shawl tighter. And they're patient. They wait for you to get tired. They wait for winter, for sickness, for a bad year. Then they come back with the same offer and a lower price. Caleb rocked slowly in his chair. Bishop lay at Morning Dove's feet, his breathing slow and even. So we don't get tired, Caleb said. Easy to say in October. Reckon so. He stood, stretched, and picked up the empty coffee cups. But I've been tired before. Still here. He went inside. The screen door closed behind him. Morning Dove stayed on the porch, watching the darkness settle over the land. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The horses shifted in the pasture. She thought about winter, about patience, about men who smiled while they measured you for a coffin. The smell reached her first faint, acrid, wrong. She stood, sniffed the air. Smoke. Not wood smoke from a stove, something sharper, chemical. She turned toward the barn. Orange light flickered against the back wall. Morning Dove ran. The orange glow grew brighter with each step. She rounded the corner of the barn and found flames licking up the back wall, not spreading fast. Not out of control yet, but hungry. Eating at the weathered planks with patient, deliberate heat. The smell hit her full force. Kerosene, sharp and unmistakable. She grabbed the bucket from beside the water trough. Her hands moved without thought, dip, haul, throw. The water hit the flames with a hiss. Steam rose. The fire retreated, then pushed back. Caleb appeared beside her, another bucket in his hands. His shirt was half-buttoned, his feet bare. He didn't speak, just threw water. Went back, threw more. They worked in the orange-lit darkness, bucket after bucket. The well pump squealed with each draw. Morning Dove's shoulders burned. Her arm shook after the fifth bucket. The sixth nearly slipped from her grip, but the fire retreated inch by inch, grudging every bit of ground. The flames died. What remained was a blackened scar across the back wall, charred planks, scorched earth, the stink of kerosene hanging thick in the air. Mourning Dove stood there, bucket hanging loose in her grip, staring at the damage. Caleb walked the perimeter, examining the ground with the lantern he'd retrieved from the porch. Here. He crouched near the base of the wall. Kerosene-soaked rags, 3 of them, placed where they'd catch the wind. Not an accident, not drifters. A message. She set down the bucket. Her hands were shaking. Not from cold. "I'll ride for the sheriff at first light," Caleb said. Mourning Dove laughed. The sound came out wrong, thin, and bitter. "Sheriff won't help." "Maybe not. But there'll be a record. Paper trail. Paper trail. As if paper had ever protected anyone who looked like her." Sheriff Grady arrived mid-morning. He was a heavy-set man with a gray mustache and tired eyes. His badge tin, dented at one corner, caught the light as he walked around the burned section of wall. He made notes in a small book, asked questions in a voice that suggested he already knew the answers wouldn't matter. "Could have been drifters," he said finally. "We get 'em through here sometimes. Looking for easy pickings." "Drifters don't use kerosene," Caleb said, "and they don't arrange rags to catch the wind." Grady tucked the notebook into his pocket. "What I know and what I can prove ain't the same thing. Mr. Thornton, you got any witnesses? Anyone see who did this?" Silence. "Didn't think so." He looked at Mourning Dove, really looked, for the first time since arriving. "Ma'am, I'm not saying you brought this on yourself, but there's folks in town who don't like changes. Might be easier for everyone if what?" Caleb's voice went flat. "If she leaves, that what you're suggesting?" Grady held up his hands. "I'm suggesting that sometimes the smart thing and the right thing ain't the same. That's all." He tipped his hat and rode off. Mourning Dove watched him go. Her jaw ached from clenching. She spent the day in the tack room, trying to work. The leather sat on the bench. The tools hung on their pegs. Everything in its place. But her hands wouldn't cooperate. The needle slipped. The thread tangled. She cut a piece of leather wrong, too short for the fender, too narrow to salvage. Ruined. She threw it across the room. It hit the wall and fell into the corner, useless. The afternoon stretched on. She couldn't focus. Couldn't think past the smell of kerosene that still clung to her clothes, her hair, her skin. At dusk, she walked to the creek. The autumn rains had filled it since she'd arrived October. Storms that came hard and fast, then vanished. The water ran cold now, clear over smooth stones. She waded in up to her knees, then her thighs. The current tugged at her dress. Her teeth chattered. She wanted to wash it off. All of it, but the smoke, the fear, the way Sheriff Grady had looked at her like she was a problem to be solved. Her foot slipped on a mossy rock. She went down hard. The creek bottom was mud and silt, and she plunged into it, hands, knees, face. The cold water closed over her head. She came up gasping, sputtering, covered in black muck. She tried to stand, slipped again, fell forward into the mud. This time she didn't get up right away. She knelt there in the creek, mud smeared across her face, her hair hanging in wet ropes, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not grief. Something worse. the bone-deep exhaustion of fighting a war that never ended. Her mother had knelt in mud like this. Different creek, different state, same story. Soldiers burning their village, running with nothing but the clothes on her back. Her grandmother too, and her grandmother before that. Generation after generation of women on their knees in the dirt, and nothing ever changed. Morning Dove pressed her palms into the creek bed, felt the cold muck squeeze between her fingers. Let herself stay down for one more breath. 2, 3. Then she stood. Her legs shook. Her dress clung heavy with water and mud. She walked back to the cabin, leaving a trail of wet footprints on the dry grass. She packed by lamplight. The canvas bag didn't take long. She didn't own much a change of clothes, her tools, the $36 still folded in her pouch. Everything she'd accumulated in 37 years of life fit into a single bag. She was tying the drawstring when the knock came. Caleb stood in the doorway, bucket in hand. His shirt was still damp from hauling water to the horses. He looked at the bag, looked at her, didn't speak. "I bring this with me." Her voice came out hoarse. "Everywhere I go, this follows. So you just keep moving forever." Moving's kept me alive. So has staying. He set down the bucket. Question is which one you're tired of. She stared at him. The words landed somewhere deep, in a place she'd walled off years ago. "You didn't sign up for this," she said. "Neither did you." He met her eyes steady. "Don't see how that changes what's right. What's right got my husband killed. What's right got my mother driven off her land. What's right?" Her voice broke. She stopped, breathed. "Right doesn't keep you alive." "Maybe not." Caleb stepped inside the cabin. First time he'd crossed that threshold without invitation. "But running doesn't either. Not forever. Eventually you run out of places to go. And then what? Then you stand, or you lie down." He picked up her bag, held it out to her. "Your choice. Always has been." Morning Dove looked at the bag, at the door, at the darkness outside where the road waited, leading back to Clayton Springs and beyond, to the next town and the next. An endless chain of strangers and stairs and starting over. She took the bag, set it by the door, unopened. "I'll stay through winter." Her voice was steady now. Not strong steady. "After that, we'll see." Caleb nodded. No celebration, no relief, just acknowledgement. "I'll fix the wall tomorrow. You want to help? You're welcome. You want to work? The leather's still there." He left. Morning Dove stood alone in the cabin, mud still drying in her hair, the bag at her feet. Bishop scratched at the door. She let him in. The dog circled twice and lay down on the bare floor, his missing leg tucked beneath him. She looked at the bag, left it where it was. Morning came gray and cold. Morning Dove woke to the sound of hammering. Caleb was already at the barn, boards stacked beside him, nails held between his lips. She washed her face, changed into clean clothes, walked across the yard. "Hand me that plank." She handed it. He nailed it in place. They worked. The rhythm settled around them. Lift, hold, hammer. No conversation. No need. The burned section disappeared plank by plank, raw new wood against weathered gray. By noon, the wall was whole again. Caleb stepped back, surveying the work. Morning Dove stood beside him, sawdust in her hair. "Won't stop them from trying again," she said. "No, it won't." "What do we do?" Caleb wiped his hands on his trousers. His eyes moved to the road, empty now but full of possibility. Threat. Promise. "We make them regret it." The ledger was small palm-sized, bound in calfskin she'd tanned herself. Morning Dove set it on Caleb's kitchen table. The pages were filled with her careful script dates, materials, costs, sales, every saddle she'd made since Joseph died, every hide purchased, every spool of thread, every brass rivet. 3 years of work documented in neat columns. Caleb turned the pages slowly. His finger traced the entries, quantities, prices, profit margins calculated to the penny. "You kept all this?" "My mother couldn't read. She taught me to write everything down." Morning Dove pulled up a chair across from him. If they ever came for her soldiers, agents, anyone she wanted proof she'd done nothing wrong, it never helped. But she kept the records anyway. "You've been expecting this fight?" "I've been expecting a fight my whole life. Just never had ammunition before." Caleb closed the ledger, set it on the table between them. "Ammunition's no good without a gun to fire it." He stood, crossed to the writing desk in the corner, and pulled out paper. Ink, a pen that looked like it hadn't been used in years. "I served with a man in the war, Samuel Morrison. Captain now commands a cavalry unit out of Fort Bridger." He sat back down, dipped the pen. "He owes me a favor. More than one, actually. And he knows quality tack when he sees it." "You're writing to the Army?" "I'm writing to a friend who happens to buy saddles for the Army." He looked up at her. "There's a difference. One's a request. The other's a transaction between men who trust each other." Morning Dove watched him write. His hand moved slowly. He wasn't practiced at letters, but the words came steady. He described the saddles, described her craftsmanship, mentioned the cavalry specifications she'd already mastered. What if he says no? "Then we find another way." Caleb signed his name, blotted the ink. "But Sam Morrison rode 3 days on a saddle I repaired with nothing but rawhide and spit. If anyone understands what good work is worth, it's him." 2 weeks passed. Morning Dove worked, finished 2 more saddles, started a third. The rhythm of labor kept her hands busy, kept her mind from circling. Caleb rode to town twice for supplies, for news, for the mail that might or might not contain an answer. Each time he returned empty-handed. Morning Dove felt the weight settle a little heavier. On the 15th day, he came back at a gallop. She heard the hoofbeats from the tack room and stepped outside, leather awl still in her hand. Caleb swung down before his horse had fully stopped. He was holding an envelope. It came. The paper was heavy. Official. A cavalry insignia stamped in the corner. Morning Dove's hands were steady as she took it. Opened the seal. Read, "Mr. Thornton, if the saddles are half as good as your word, I'll take 8. Government rate, $40 each. Deliver by December, and there's more work where that came from. I remember what you did at Chickamauga. Consider this the beginning of repayment. Cap S. Morrison Fort Bridger, $40 each." Morning Dove read the letter twice, 3 times. The numbers didn't change. $320, she said. "For 8 saddles." "Government rate's higher than ranch price," Caleb said. "Cavalry spec means double the materials, triple the time. They're paying for quality that'll hold up under hard use. Plus the ones I've already sold, plus whatever comes next." She looked up from the letter. This isn't charity. This is a government contract. Official business. The kind that comes with paperwork and records and legitimacy. Yes. She sat down on the porch step. Her legs had stopped holding her properly. $320. More money than she'd seen in her entire life. More than Joseph had ever earned in a year. Enough to buy land. If she wanted. Enough to disappear. Enough to stay. Sunday morning came clear and cold. Morning Dove loaded 5 saddles into Caleb's wagon, 3 finished, 2 that needed only final touches. She'd been up since before dawn, oiling the leather, polishing the brass, making sure every stitch was visible and perfect. You sure about this? Caleb climbed onto the wagon seat beside her. No. She smoothed her dress, the good one. The one without patches. But I'm sure about hiding even less. They rode into Clayton Springs as the church bells rang. The streets were emptier than usual. Most folks were at the Methodist church on the hill, but a few shopkeepers stood in doorways, watching. Morning Dove felt their eyes like heat on her skin. Caleb pulled up in front of the general store. Hutchins came outside, arms crossed, mouth set in a thin line. Can't set up here. This is private property. We're in the street, Caleb said. Street's public. He climbed down and started unloading the saddles. Set them on sawhorses he'd brought in the wagon bed. Morning Dove arranged them angled to catch the light, positioned so passers-by could see the stitching, the tooling, the quality of the work. The church bells stopped. A few minutes later, people began appearing on the street. Sunday clothes, Sunday faces. Curious despite themselves. A man approached Rancher. From the look of his boots, he ran his hand along the nearest cantle. This your work? Yes. Double-stitched, waxed thread. He tested the stirrup leather. What are you asking? $12. He whistled low. That's fair. More than fair. He bought it on the spot. Another man came, then another. Morning Dove answered questions about the leather, about the construction, about where she'd learned. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. She let the work speak. The crowd grew. Martha Hutchins emerged from the general store, watched for a moment, then retreated inside. Harlan Pritchard appeared on the boardwalk across the street, stood there with his son, arms folded, glaring. Morning Dove ignored them. Sold another saddle. Then Dietz arrived. He came from the direction of the hotel, dressed in his usual too-clean suit, walking with the casual confidence of a man who owned things. He stopped at the edge of the crowd and watched. Caleb moved to stand beside Morning Dove, not blocking Dietz, just present. Dietz smiled, approached. Quite a display. His eyes moved over the remaining saddles. Very enterprising. Just business, Morning Dove said. Indeed. He picked up Captain Morrison's letter, which Caleb had pinned to the display board. Read it slowly. His smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. A cavalry contract, how industrious. He set the letter back down. I didn't realize you had military connections. I have friends, Caleb said. Friends with paperwork. Dietz turned to him. The smile was thinner now. Paperwork? Yes, very useful. Paperwork. Creates records, obligations. He straightened his cuffs. Of course, government contracts come with government scrutiny, inspections, questions about suppliers, about citizenship, about quality. Mourning Dove cut in. That's what they inspect. Quality. She picked up a finished saddle, the best of the remaining 3, and held it out to him. Go ahead. Check the stitching. Test the tree. Look for any flaw you can find. Dietz didn't take it. I'm not a saddler, Mrs. He caught himself. Mourning Dove. No. You're not. She set the saddle back down. So maybe you should leave the saddle business to people who know what they're doing. The crowd had gone quiet, watching. Pritchard still stood on the boardwalk, his son beside him. Dietz studied her for a long moment. Then he tipped his hat, the same mockery of courtesy he'd used the first time they met, and walked away. He didn't look back. Pritchard moved. Mourning Dove saw him step off the boardwalk, start across the street toward her display. His son followed, fists already clenched. Caleb shifted his weight. His hand moved toward his belt, though he wasn't armed. Pritchard stopped 3 feet away. His face was hard, weathered, angry, the face of a man looking for someone to blame. You think one letter changes anything. His voice was low, pitched for her ears alone. You think the Army cares what happens out here? I think the Army cares about their saddles. Mourning Dove met his gaze. And I think you care about your store. Pritchard's jaw tightened. Your boy. She nodded toward the younger Pritchard. He's, 19, 20 strong back. Good hands. Can't find work because nobody's hiring? That's none of your... I need an apprentice. The words came out before she'd fully planned them. Risky. Maybe foolish. But she'd watched the boy's face at the barn that night. He hadn't been holding a torch. And his hands, when he'd looked at her saddles just now, had been curious, not angry. Pritchard stared at her. His son stared at her. Caleb stared at her. Leather work pays, Mourning Dove continued. I've got more orders than I can fill alone. Your boy wants to learn a trade. I'll teach him. Fair wages. Honest work. Pritchard's mouth opened, closed. His son stepped forward. Pa. Shut up, Will. But the damage was done. Mourning Dove had seen the flicker in Will Pritchard's eyes. Interest. Hope. The hunger of a young man with nothing to do and nowhere to go. Think about it, she said. You know where to find me. She turned back to her display, sold the last saddle to a rancher from the next county, began packing up the sawhorses. Pritchard stood there for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away, his son trailing behind him. The crowd dispersed, the street emptied. Caleb climbed onto the wagon seat. You just offered a job to the son of a man who tried to burn down our barn. I offered a job to a boy who hasn't done anything yet except follow his father. Mourning Dove climbed up beside him. People make choices. Sometimes they make better ones when they have options. And if he chooses wrong, then I'll know, and I'll deal with it. They rode out of Clayton Springs in silence. The letter from Captain Morrison sat folded in her pocket, $320 promised. Legitimacy granted. A future opening up like a door she'd never expected to find unlocked. But as the wagon crested the hill outside town, Mourning Dove looked back. Virgil Dietz stood on the hotel porch. Watching them go, he wasn't smiling anymore, smiling. 6 months changed the shape of things. The first snow came and went. Then the second. 8 saddles shipped to Fort Bridger before Christmas. Dietz's hotel room in Clayton Springs stayed booked through December, though he traveled often business elsewhere. People said, Morning Dove noticed he never gave up the room entirely. Waiting. But waiting was a game two could play. She stood in the doorway of the tack room, her tack room now, though she still caught herself thinking of it as borrowed space, and watched Will Pritchard struggle with an edge stitch. The boy's hands were too rough, too impatient. He pulled the thread like he was fighting it instead of guiding it. Slower. Will looked up. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the spring chill. I'm trying. You're rushing. Thread doesn't care how strong you are. It cares how patient. She crossed to his workbench, the second bench, built 3 months ago when orders from Fort Bridger doubled, and she couldn't keep up alone, and took the leather from his hands, demonstrated the stitch, slow, deliberate, each movement precise. Like this. See how the needle angles, you're going straight through, that weakens the seam. Will watched, nodded, took the leather back, and tried again. Better. Not good yet, but better. My husband used to say you learn by teaching. Morning Dove returned to her own bench, picked up the saddle she'd been tooling. I didn't understand what he meant until now. What did he mean? That when you have to explain something, you understand it differently, deeper. She carved a curved line into the leather part of a design she'd been developing, something new that combined traditional patterns with cavalry utility. You're not just doing anymore. You're seeing. Will was quiet for a moment. His needle moved through the leather slow this time, angled properly. My pa thinks I'm wasting my time here. What do you think? The boy didn't answer right away. His jaw worked, the way his father's did, when he was chewing on something he didn't want to say. I think this is the first thing I've been good at. He pulled the thread tight, examined the stitch. The first thing that felt like mine. Morning Dove kept her eyes on her work. Let the words settle without comment. Will Pritchard had shown up 3 weeks after the Sunday exhibition. Alone. His father didn't approve, or pretended not to notice. The boy had stood in the barn doorway, shoulders hunched, and asked if the offer still stood. She'd put him to work that same day. Harlan Pritchard hadn't spoken to Caleb since, crossed the street to avoid them in town, but he hadn't burned anything else either. And Will came to work every morning, learned every evening, and rode home in between without speaking to his father about any of it. Some things changed slow. She'd learned to accept that. The garden was blooming. Morning Dove walked the rows after supper, checking the herbs she'd planted in February. Sage was coming up strong. Lavender, too. The rosemary struggled. It wanted sandier soil, but the thyme had spread like it owned the place. Caleb had built the fence without being asked. One morning she'd come out to find him digging post holes, the lumber already cut and stacked. He hadn't said anything, just built it, painted it, and gone back to his own work. The fence was crooked in places. He wasn't as skilled as he'd once been. 8 years without building anything had cost him. But it held. That was enough. She pinched a sprig of sage, crushed it between her fingers, and breathed in the sharp, green smell. Her mother had grown sage, her grandmother too. The smell carried memory, not painful, not sweet, just present. A thread connecting her to women she'd never see again. The screen door creaked. Caleb came out onto the porch, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He sat in his rocking chair, the old one, the one he'd built for himself years ago, and set the second cup on the arm of the chair beside it. The new chair. He'd made it in January, during the deep cold when outdoor work was impossible. Morning Dove had watched him from the window of her cabin sawing, sanding, fitting joints together with the careful attention of a man relearning something he'd forgotten. Sawdust on his hands for the first time in years. The chair wasn't as fine as the first. The proportions were slightly off, the curve of the back not quite right. But it held her weight, and it rocked smooth. And when she sat in it, she could see the same horizon he saw. She climbed the porch steps, took the coffee, sat. They rocked in silence for a while. The sun dropped toward the western ridge. Bishop lay between them, his 3 legs tucked beneath him, eyes half closed. "Got a letter from Morrison today," Caleb said. "He wants 12 more saddles by September, and he's asking about bridles, says if your leather work is as good as your saddle work, he'll take 20. 20 bridles is a lot of work. Will's getting better. He could handle the basic stitching." Morning Dove sipped her coffee. Let the warmth spread through her. "I've been thinking about the east section," Caleb said. "Got timber rights there. Good trees, cedar, some pine. Enough to build a cabin if someone wanted." She kept rocking. Didn't look at him. "A person could have their own place. Proper place. Not a foreman's cabin. Room to expand the workshop, maybe. Space for more apprentices. If the orders keep coming. That's a lot of work for one person. Doesn't have to be one person." The words hung in the cooling air. Morning Dove set down her coffee cup. Her hands found the leather she'd brought out habit, always having something to work on, and she began stitching the edge of a wallet she was making from scraps. Something small, something to keep her fingers busy while her mind worked. "This cabin's got a good stove." Caleb was quiet. "And the light's right for close work. Morning light comes through the window at the perfect angle." She pulled the thread through, slow, deliberate. "I'd have to think hard about giving that up." "You wouldn't have to give it up. You could keep using it. Workshop space, storage, whatever you needed." "And where would I sleep?" The question sat between them, not heavy, not light, just there, waiting to be answered or not answered. Caleb rocked his chair. Once, twice. "There's room in the main house. Has been for 8 years. Morning Dove's needle paused. She looked up, really looked at the man beside her. The gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes, the hands that had learned to hold a saddle tree steady, that had built a fence around her garden, that had written a letter to save her work. Is that a business proposition? It's whatever you want it to be. She went back to her stitching. The leather was soft, well oiled, the thread pulled through easy. I'll think about it. Caleb nodded, picked up his coffee, didn't push. They sat there until the light faded and the stars came out. Then she went to her cabin, and he went to his house. And Bishop chose her doorstep the way he had every night for 6 months. Morning came the way it always did. Morning Dove woke before dawn, dressed, walked to the tack room, and lit the lamp. Will would arrive in an hour. There was work to do before then, a saddle to finish, bridle leather to cut, orders to review. She was measuring hide when she heard hoofbeats. Caleb, riding in from the north pasture. He'd been out since before first light, checking the herd. The bay gelding picked its way across the yard, and Caleb swung down by the water trough. Bishop barked once. Announcement, not alarm. Morning Dove looked up from her work. Caleb tipped his hat. She turned back to the leather. But something had shifted, some weight she'd carried so long, she'd forgotten it was there. Gone now. Or not gone. Changed. Will's horse came up the road. The boy dismounted, tied up, walked toward the tack room with the particular eagerness of someone who had somewhere to belong. Morning. Morning. The edge stitching show me what you remember. He sat at his bench, picked up his work, began. Morning Dove watched for a moment. Then she picked up her own tools and started the day. Outside. Caleb pumped water for the horses. The rhythm was steady, unhurried. Bishop lay in a patch of early sunlight. The garden fence cast long shadows across the herbs. Ordinary morning, ordinary work, ordinary life. She'd spent so long running, so long expecting the next town, the next rejection, the next fire in the night. And here she was still working, still teaching, still alive, still here. The needle moved through leather. The thread held tight. There's something quiet that stays with us after a story like this one. Not quite sadness, not quite joy, but something in between. A tender weight that settles in the chest and asks nothing of us except to be felt. Many of us have known what it is to be looked past, to carry work in our hands that others refuse to see. Some of us have stood in doorways, measuring the distance to the tree line, calculating how quickly we could leave if we needed to. And perhaps you have known, too, what it means to find one person, just one who asks about the stitching instead of the circumstances. These things don't need to be resolved tonight. The questions Morning Dove carries, the silence Caleb learned to live with, the choices Will Pritchard is only beginning to make, they can rest now. It's all right to let them be. Some stories end with answers. This one ends with a needle moving through leather, and 2 rocking chairs on a porch, and a 3-legged dog choosing where to sleep. That's enough. That's more than enough. Thank you for sitting with this story. Thank you for staying until the end.